he says females, all females, are to be revered. They are the life bringers. They are what anchors us to the good and the true. Without them, we are lost.
Ugh,
Yes.
facts, facts. Welcome to Morally Gray Babes. We're your hosts, Jen and Amber, two unapologetic book addicts diving deep into the steamiest reads, hottest book boyfriends, and those spicy moments that make you blush.
Amber here, and we're not just here to talk plot twists and character arcs. We're breaking down everything from our favorite quotes to the spice levels that really bring the heat.
Expect a lot of laughs, a little cussing, and some seriously hot takes. Whether we're gushing over fictional men or dishing out the truth on what books deserve the hype, nothing is off limits.
So buckle up, Buttercup, and get ready for real, raw, and totally unfiltered book talk. Because we're the book besties you didn't know you needed. Today, we're diving into a book by Ivy Knox named Saving His Mate. This is book 1 in the series Aliens of Ilura. I hope I said that correctly.
No, that's literally how I said it too in my head. So awesome.
So, Saving His Mate is basically a full-length sci-fi romance featuring this golden-skinned alien with supposedly breathtaking eyes and a secret past that threatens to destroy his future. It also has a curvy 35-year-old heroine who is sick of feeling broken and determined to reclaim her independence in an attraction that neither of them can deny. So, before we dive in, Jen is going to give a little spill about how she read this book. For me, I read it on Kindle, book
Yes.
copy.
So I read it on Kindle too, but the day that I read it the evening before, and then Tuesday, I needed to drive 3 hours north and then 3 hours back. And I liked it so much that I didn't want to not be able to read it, but I was driving. And so I couldn't read while I was driving. And so I found this little button in Kindle that you can press and it will read it for you. It's like a robot voice. It's obviously for reading impaired, impaired probably, but I used it and I have to tell you my adult daughter was sleeping on the drive up there and she like woke up and she's like, what the heck are you listening to? I don't recommend it for sex scenes, but I wanted to it was really bad. But I was really into it and I really wanted to listen to it. So I have far less notes than Amber has. So I'm going to let Amber take the lead on reading all of the things and then I'll jump in on what she has to say as well. And of course I've got thoughts on the book too.
Of course. I mean, yes, we all have thoughts. So this book is, like I said, book 1 of the series. It is focusing on Varric and Chloe. So the blurb says, sold at auction on an alien planet. Chloe assumed death was around the corner, but she found love instead. Dumped by her longtime boyfriend, Chloe decides to embrace spinsterhood by adopting 1 or 5 dogs. Those plans are squashed when she's kidnapped from Earth and shoved into a glass cage with 2 other terrified human women on an alien planet. I mean, how could it possibly get any worse? The 3 women are sold at auction to the highest bidder, who happens to be a 7-foot-tall alien named Varric with shimmering gold skin and muscles for days. He recognizes Chloe as his fated mate, but he knows he can never have her because of a tragic past he continues to run from. Varric takes her back to his home planet of Ilura and vows to keep her settled in the enchanting village of tree houses he shares with his clan. He'll keep her safe and ensure she's sheltered and fed. That's it. But the closer they get, the stronger their bond becomes, and the harder it is for Chloe to imagine ever going back to Earth. Chloe has found the kind of love she always wanted, but will Varric's dark past tear them apart? Dun dun dun. So
Yeah.
that's
And now, by the way, this book was my first alien romance that I read. So I have to let you know that I was very excited. Amber's just pushing all of my boundaries. No, I'm just kidding. I have to say for my first alien book, it makes me want to read more. Like that's how good I thought it was. And interesting and intriguing. And there's just so much more depth and story when you like extend it to the whole alien and universe and things like that. And I was really excited to read it, and it was very enjoyable.
Yes. So we're going to talk about the dedication triggers and get back into the book, but I'm going to share how we go about picking books. So one thing is that Jen doesn't like to have me reread a book. So that's
That's awful. Although we might be doing Psycho Shifters, so we might
we
have
will
to
be
do
doing psycho shit.
I'm just saying, so because I haven't read it, she loves it, she's read it before again,
It's
I
like
think,
my
and
one of my only 5-star reads, and I may read it again and be like, "Oh, it's not," or I may be like, "Oh, it's a 6," but
yeah.
we'll get there. So, there's a lot of Alien series, and I don't wanna say I like when I get into a genre, I go down a rabbit hole, and I will read for like a solid month, just that. And so I had a month of like Monster, Dark Academia, Mafia, and I've read so many good books. So if you're like, you started this as her first, well, there was a lot of Alien series that she would not allow me to reread, and that's totally fine.
Let's just be honest that she hadn't read.
Yes. So, and then when we were reading a book that we already, by the time this episode has released, you'll have heard the previous episode where we're talking about Her Sweet Arc by Meg Rhodes. She mentions Ivy Knox, and I had never heard of her before. And I went down the rabbit hole and I was like, I think I found our next book. It's going to be alien romance. I know you just read Monster. Now we're going to dive into aliens. Are you okay with this? And you're like, I'm up for whatever. So that's how we
Literally.
got into this book. I thought it was a really good series. We'll just dive in. First, there wasn't a dedication. So that makes,
Which I thought was weird. Aren't books supposed to have dedications? I thought it was weird. That was, to me, was very shocking.
I think some books, I don't know. I like it when they have dedications. I love it when they make the dedications like really personal and talk about like when you can relate with them. Like I feel
Yes.
like I can relate to the last book
Oh,
that we read, their dedication.
oh yes.
So when we got to this one, it was like, there's none. I was like, oh,
Summer.
I was like, we lamb. I'm so sad. But this book, let's talk about the triggers before we move on. This book contains scenes that either mention or describe, obviously, abduction, rape, anxiety, depression, which may be triggering for some. So, if you or someone else you know is in need of support, there are places you can go for help. This book actually lists a lot of resources at the end of the book, which I thought was really nice. But if any of those things that we mentioned as a trigger is triggering for you, then this may not be the podcast or the book to dive into, which is okay. Just come back later and hopefully the next book will be good. That being said, let's dive into the book. So, first thing I like to talk about before we talk about the book itself is nicknames because they're my favorite.
Yes.
And Varric had a nickname for Chloe, but it wasn't like a nickname per se. It was just what the word mate meant in his language, which was Inara. And
I loved it.
I beautiful. So that was one thing that I loved. Things that I loved about this book, right? So it's an alien romance. We're not going to give too much away. We're just going to talk about what we loved, things that irked you a little bit about it, and like some of my favorite quotes. But what I loved about it was that there's these three women and they bonded over their circumstances and they stuck together throughout the whole story. And I'm just going to give this little side note because Jen read this book. We started, I think, around the same time. And then
Yes.
she had a whole day where she was traveling. She was busy through the day. I had a day where I was homeschooling and working from home. So I had a little bit more free time than Jen. So I finished the first book. And then while I was waiting on her for the next 2 days, I just read the second and third in the series. I will just be honest.
That is so wild.
Because I was just like, oh, well, I want to see what happens to her. Because there's three girlfriends.
So I'll be reading those if I get ahead of you, is
Yes,
kind of what I'm
yes,
guessing.
exactly. So
I was just like, yeah, I read the next one because I just had to know.
There was the whole Kate situation that
Yes.
you needed to
So
I need to know that
and
too.
Kate wasn't second. So it's Chloe, it's Ava, again another Ava, and then Kate. And then book 4 is I want to read book 4 too, but I think there's 6 in this series, but so I wanted to read how the girls I wanted to read each of their stories. Like it wasn't complete to me at the end of this one. I just was like, what happened next? And then it was like it starts talking about Ava, and I was like, not that one.
Yes, and I will say that the thing that impressed me, so I had some visions of what I thought an alien romance book would be like. And some of
Or
it
was it
played out,
Twitter
some of
81?
it played out. You know, one thing I loved was that the book with the 3, I mean, they have a main female character, right? And then the other 2, and they're all 3 friends. They were all plus-sized women,
Yes.
and I loved that. I loved that because I don't think there's enough books like that. It was a book about perspectives, right? Because you have the alien, which is a totally different culture and life and words and the whole 9 yards. And then these girls. And, you know, she didn't feel really comfortable exactly with, I mean, she got to a comfortable spot, but really she had a lot of insecurities inside. And he in his like in his thoughts, like when you're reading what he's thinking and stuff, he is like thinks she is the next best thing since sliced bread. Like anything she's like, oh well, I'm kind of soft, and he's like, and you're so yummy, and like he is like what men should be, period. I loved that about this book.
So I agree. I love that each woman was a bit curvy, right? And the thing about this one is so there's 3 women, 2 get abducted kind of at the same time. And then this one, Chloe, gets abducted like or is passed out for a little bit longer. So the other 2 have a stronger bond than with Chloe. So it's kind of like, and then they look up to her as a leader. But I loved how these female main characters were all in their 30s. I feel like Chloe
Yes.
was like the youngest, like at 35, and then Kate was the oldest at 39, roughly, I think. But I love that. It also helped that the male main character was also in his late 30s, I feel like, or maybe he was 100 years old. I don't remember how old he was.
Neither, but
He was older.
yeah,
It wasn't
for
like
sure.
he was like this 22-year-old guy. As a woman in her 40s, like I'm 42, I appreciate older female main characters. So I'd love that. I enjoyed the internal dialogue from Chloe. I loved how she processed what she was facing with humor. Like she's talking about how she is there in that on stage, right, ready to be
Yes.
auctioned, and she's looking at everybody, and she's just like,
Like in a fishbowl tank.
she's like, she's seeing all the different aliens, and she's like, this is who the fuck knows Whereville in some random galaxy, and I just thought that was funny because that would be my humor. I would hope in that kind of scenario where I would try to find like the dark humor. I always find it intriguing that they describe all these other aliens, right?
Yes.
And none of them are really compatible with humans except for the main male character. I'm like, why can't we have like another person who's also another alien that's also kind of humanoid
Yeah.
instead of like looking like Jabba the Hutt or looking like a beak man like with feathers? Like why can't some other aliens be humanoid except for him? Because it just kind of makes it really obvious.
And, you know, I think it's the one of the things that I also really, really loved about this book was that all 3 of them, by virtue of what's going on in their life at the time that they're abducted, are perfect to be abducted. And I kind of thought the whole book would kind of be like that, and it's not. Like, that is such a tiny piece of the book. But what I loved, and I'm just going to share one of the quotes that I did highlight because I was listening in the car for most of them. But it says, however, not everyone is born into loving, supporting family. And if embracing the family you've got means constantly enduring hateful comments, abuse of any kind, and general happiness, then why keep them in your life? I feel guilty even saying this, but verbalizing the thoughts I've had for so long feels really good. I think everyone deserves to be happy. So if your blood relatives make you feel like trash, then build your own family. I was like, that's the book. Like, mic drop. That's like, it's so good.
It was so good.
That's like my favorite quotes.
It's one of those quotes at the very end that she says, and I thought it summed up the book as well. Really good, like the purpose of the book. I will share quotes, but first I want to share some things I loved about it before we.
Oh, yes.
I loved how fiercely Varric and his second in command fought to bring all those women back with them. And I think the reason I loved it so much was because Chloe fought so hard. Like she was fighting so hard to save the other two while she was being auctioned off. I just love it when
Oh, yeah.
women
'Cause
fight
there was
each other.
it
Because you
was
can just see like some if most, I don't know, maybe most people, or maybe I don't want to generalize, but I would think that a lot of people would freeze in that scenario and not try to fight for the other women. And she fought. And I just like, yes. I love the fated mates. I love it when they have special connections with mates. Like this one was basically like they felt a tug, right? A tug to that
like a
person.
physical pull, like a
Tether. That's how they
yeah,
described it.
physical emotional pull, like they couldn't yeah.
I like that. That's fine. I love it more whenever they have like scented fated mates.
Yeah, the Omegaverse.
What? Yes. But even
We
that,
need to do a podcast about the scents of fated mates because I have scent that I would wanna be exuding. And I'm
we'll talk
curious
about
what
that
yours
later.
is.
I feel like
We digress.
I feel like this is a tangent that could go off for hours. But in this book, it was just a tether. However, what I'm trying to get at is like I like how authors interpret. Oh my god,
Incorporate.
we're just going to keep going because I'm not saying it right and I don't have enough caffeine in me. So I love how they can describe fated mates. And a lot of authors do it differently. Some are very similar, but they have their own style. And so this one, they felt a tether, which is fine. Like that's good. But when they become mates, when they seal the bond, they had that mental connection. And I'm just like, yes.
Love that. Love that. And when you're ready, I do have one thing did not sort of care for in the book.
Okay, let me finish my two things.
You got it.
The other two things, there was a moment where Chloe stood up to the councilman at the very end and she barked at one of the members. I absolutely enjoyed seeing her stand up and be fierce because she is going to be with the clan leader, basically. I felt like she only had like two areas where she was like a badass. It was whenever she was fighting for the women at the auction and in that rare moment when she barked at that councilman. But throughout the whole book, she never showed that fierceness that I really wanted her to. So I was really proud of her in that moment. The other thing that I loved about this book, and it's not even like, it's not really part of the story, it was just like something that was said and it was part of the history of Varric's clan, which I can't even name the planet. It starts with the T, Trivia, something.
Trivia is how I said it in my head. Trivia.
Okay, that sounds good. So he's on this planet, and basically, a lot of his species died. We're just going to say that. And so he mentions that they planted a tree on top of each person's resting place when they died. And when they said that, he was like, the bigger the tree, the longer they have passed. And then the author wrote, Varric said, it's a way to thank the land for accepting the vessels that formerly held the souls of our loved ones. And I just thought that was so beautiful.
It's so funny. I exactly had that same annotation in the book.
And
I
so
loved that. I loved that a lot.
Okay. Now that I said all that, I have some quotes, but tell me what irked you.
Now, it could be potentially because I was listening in the robot voice at some points, but you also mentioned it to me in Voxer, and that's they so Chloe is her name,
Mhm.
and the aliens pronounced it Chloe. Like it was like a two-syllable
Oh my God.
word.
I have this also in my notes as something that irked
Yeah,
me.
and all the aliens did that, which I get if you're speaking, but they did it when they were thinking too, and that
Yeah.
frustrating.
So it was, yeah, I'll just share my notes because I said it constantly reading the aliens mispronouncing the names due to their inability to form one syllable words. So, and I was like, oh my God, like Ava and Kate, they had the hardest time. Now I got so frustrated reading that over and over again. But then when they had the mental connection, it was gone and it just ticked me off. I was
Well,
like,
and in this book, they do a procedure to be able to understand English, right?
yes.
The aliens. So if that's the case, then shouldn't they their internal dialogue have the correct name?
Dude.
I mean, I'm just saying. And by the way,
Good.
super minor
It's so
for
minor.
a really good book, but we're going to be honest on this podcast. So.
Yeah. The other thing that irked, and the author mentions it, and she tells like her reason why, and I totally understood it, but it just irked me a little. The other thing that just got to me, and I know it's for the storyline, but it made me not like the male main character, was his just self-loathing and not feeling like he was worthy enough to the of having a maid, having Chloe, mainly because of his father's actions, which I'm not really spoiling anything because I think that's like said in chapter 2. But it was just like it started to irk me a wee bit, especially whenever his distancing and how he would say things would
Her,
make her feel unworthy and
yes.
accepting herself. And I was like, it felt like we were in 70% of the book and he was still self-loathing.
Yes,
It's like,
keeping her at a distance,
uh,
like emotionally, I would
and
say.
it wasn't even things that he did. It was things that
No,
he did.
I know. I'm just recognizing this right now.
It's okay.
But I think you and I both do not care a lot. Like this was a good book, or it would be a bigger deal. You and I both don't like the
Oh
miscommunication.
no, this one made me.
Like that is my least. You said, I think too, that it was your least favorite book. And so it had a smidge of that. I mean, not just a smidge, it had that in there. And yet I still like the book. So that's how good this book is, I think.
Yes. I agree because miscommunication is like top tier, one of the things I dislike the most. And it felt
Right.
like there was so much miscommunication. Like if he would just say
For everyone though, not just them.
not them,
Like
everybody.
really.
Every
Uh-huh.
and I was like, if they could just say the full sentence, like I get that's like the character development and the growth and everything, but whenever he was still pushing her away for actions that he didn't himself cause, he tried to rectify. I just
That
really wanted Chloe to like smash him and be like, "You are worthy."
well, there we go.
So the other thing was we had just finished reading Her Sweet Org, like I said earlier, who mentioned Ivy Knox, and there was two scenarios, like two little sayings that both books had in it. And I don't know if it irked me, but it pulled me out of that book and into the other book. And to me, like that's when something irks me is like whenever I'm pulled out of the story to something else. And it's whenever they say death by dicking. um, so Cade, who was abducted with Chloe, said, "Death by dicking, what a tombstone that would make." And it was so similar to a statement said in the other podcast, in the other book that we read. And so both times it made me chuckle, but had I not read them so close together, I may not have noticed it. But since we
I agree.
did, I did. And that just kind of was like, oh, I like
But then having it in both books, it was like,
it was both books so close read together.
yeah, for sure.
So we can go with the quotes if you want to start.
Yeah, you go ahead and do your quotes and then I'll do mine because the quote I have is like at the end, toward the end of the book.
Okay, I have a lot. You've already read one. which was my favorite. But it's right when they first get abducted. Kate wipes her eyes and her face is turning red because she's laughing so hard. And she's talking to Ava and Chloe. And she says, I'm sorry. I was just thinking about how we all probably thought we hit rock bottom when we were still on Earth. And she breaks into a much louder giggle fit. And then we were kidnapped by aliens and thrown into this glass cage with a poop bucket. I just thought that was so funny because there's a lot of times, and even recently, there was a time where I told my hubby, I was like, I hit rock bottom. Like, this is it. I don't know if it can get worse. And like,
Don't ever say that.
and then when I read this, I just started laughing. I was like, I could be in a glass cage with a poop bucket. Like, I thought that was really hilarious. One quote from Varric, who you love,
Yes.
and how you love how he loves. I think this basically sums it up is he says, all females are to be revered. They are the life bringers. They are what anchors us to the good and the true. Without them, we are lost.
Ugh.
Yes.
Facts. Facts.
And then there's one that's with Chloe, and she says, Ver ich? I repeat to him slowly, hoping I got it right. He closes his eyes and smiles like he's been waiting a century to hear me say his name. Yes. Boom.
That is, I remember that one. That was good.
That was a good one.
That was really good.
Okay. Oh, I got one more. It just made me blush. When he says, Varric tells her, he said, Ko-e. See, there we go again. Ko-e, tell me you want this. I do not want to scare you, but I fear that if you put your lips on me again, nothing will be able to tear me away from you.
I mean, yeah. These little book boyfriends, they're setting the standard.
These alien created mates. They're bringing it. Okay, what's your favorite quote?
Okay, at the end of the book, and it's not by either of the main characters, and I am not going to describe anything leading up to this, so it might be a little bit out of pocket, but I don't want to ruin like the ending for people. But this is set. As the council's historian, I have studied the different approaches to leading a society since our people first settled here. I have also studied the leadership methods from many planets in many galaxies. It does not matter the race or the species. A leader who instills fear in their people stunts the growth of their society. In some cases, it can even cause hatred among neighbors and violence inflicted upon the most vulnerable. And we're in the middle of a presidential election at the moment, and so that really seemed to hit hard. I have read it to 4 other people because I just thought it was so facts. It was so true.
Yeah, it was a good quote. It was a good statement.
Yeah.
And like when you were reading, I was like, yeah, I remember that scene.
I was like, the thing that followed afterwards
Yes.
made sense, and it was really good.
Yes. One more thing that I liked about the book, and then we can tell about our ratings. I like all the side characters, right? And I don't think we get enough of them. And I don't know how to say side character without giving away the stories, but I loved the clans, like, and that's what they call themselves, a clan. Loved their lead scientist, who was a female. I loved her behavior.
Badass, by the way.
I love the chef. I love the second in command and the broody third. I like the medicine woman. Like, I loved hearing all the side characters. Yeah, the one thing that they didn't really touch on as I'm thinking about this book and I'm thinking about the characters was that there was no children. When they talked about the book and there all these people are going to this, and I don't know if that's because of what happened on the planet.
Yeah, that's what I took it as, is what which is why these 3 women, they saved them, but the clan was very excited
There were
about that.
still women in the clan, and they were still no children were there, and they didn't touch on it. Like, they didn't touch that there was no children in the clan. They just didn't talk about it. Like, even the women didn't say, they were like, oh, there's going to be more men than women, but they didn't say anything else. Like, even the women weren't shocked there was no kids there. Like, it just, to me, it was just kind of like, I don't know. I think if I didn't see youth somewhere, that was, but I thought
Wonderful.
it was for me. Oh, let's do spice rating before we go overall.
Well, and before we get to that too, one thing I will say is I loved the detail in describing the world that they go to. I mean, living in the woods, right? But the details of that and the way that they built their homes and the way that they did all of these things, for me, it really like more put me in that story.
And I think whenever you read books 2 and 3, you start to realize how they don't even, that clan, that group, they don't really explore past their little area that they have kind of quarantined.
Mhm.
So that's kind of interesting. Because in book 1, I didn't really get that feel. And then whenever I was reading, like, I think it was book 3, I was like, oh, this planet is a lot larger than what we think about it.
And he pointed to that because remember when they were approaching in the ship and he said, "This is my home." And he said, "This is the area. We don't live on this area. We live on the other side of the planet." I thought that was interesting.
Dude, I was very glad to get Kate's story. I'm just gonna say, Kate was the one.
I was curious about her and I was frustrated that we didn't know what was going on. And then I think I told you, I'm like, I'm sure it's because they've got other books and she's just enticing people to read the other book to get to that. And
Yes,
they made you read 2 other books to get
I
to that.
did. I read too, and then you were like, "I'm done." I'm like, "Okay, so am I with Kate's story." Um, so I will say, spice rating, if you're ready to go on, is that for me, I think this was a 2. There were a few scenes within the book, but it was more for me. If I feel like it was more focused on plot and character development, as it said the entire series, which I liked, obviously because I read the next 2. So I would say spice level, this was a 2 for me.
I think I wrote down a 3 because it wasn't just like 2 scenes. There was more than that.
Fair.
But it wasn't super detailed, so I might change my answer to 2 also.
Yes, because we've read some that were super.
We read some that were like 5. So yeah, no, I think 2 is a fair assessment of that actually.
And you may be skewed just a little. I will say that again because you read it in a robotic voice.
I listened to it and skipped some pages because my daughter was in the car. She's an adult. She's 24. Like she could hear it, but in the robot voice, I was like,
That's
yeah,
awkward.
very.
So overall rating for me, this book stated if you like huge, sexy aliens, fated mates, steamy love scenes, and happily ever afters, you would love the series. And I agree. It delivers on all these accounts. I wish, like I said, Chloe was a bit more bad Sassarina than what was mentioned, but overall, and I wish Varric just understood his worth and how amazing he was as a leader sooner. But I understand it's part of growth and character development. And I know this is just my preference. But I think it was a sweet alien human romance with lots of plot, character, world building, and fated mates. So as an alien romance, this is a 4 for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a 4. I think because for me, a 5 is like I can't get it out of my head, and that's not really the case.
Oh, I will say, I was just thinking about it because we didn't even touch on this. When I was reading one of the spicy scenes, I texted you and said, his penis does something.
I made it a 3, I think, because it was a little bit more detailed.
I don't even talk about that till just now. But I remember saying that to you,
Like,
and you were,
hello.
and I was reading ahead, obviously, because you were on your drive, and you were like,
Yes.
"What does that mean?" I was like, "I don't want to give it away. Just maybe."
You'll know. You'll know when it happens.
So maybe
That was really good.
maybe it's like a 2.5.
I know we can't do 2.5s. That's why I was like,
Okay,
okay,
it's
so
a
I'm
2.
gonna go back with my original 3 because I do feel like there was some detail in there.
I still say 2.
Yeah.
Like if
Okay.
it's for me, if it's like 3 or 4, it's more focused on like the spice and then getting to like Smutville. I feel like this
Yeah.
is more on character.
And it also kept me on my toes. There were things that happened that I didn't think would like, I'm like, oh my gosh, now they have to go through this. Toward the end, I was like, what? It kept me wanting to turn the page through the book.
Yes.
That is really good for me.
So still 2 on spice for me because it was more on the plot and the development of the series. But overall, I thought this was a solid 4. And I obviously read the next 2, so I would recommend those as well.
Yeah, and I don't know really a lot about any alien romance stuff, but for my first alien romance book, this is a great way to get into alien romance because it's a really good book. It has a great story, good character building, all the things, and spice, of course. So I really recommend it for people. If you have not tried an alien book, this is a great book to try.
Agreed.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, babes. If you loved hanging out with us today, don't forget to check the show notes for all the juicy details and links. You can also join our chat for exclusive updates and behind the scenes goodie on our Instagram at Morally Babe.
And of course, follow us for more spicy reads, hot takes, and that unfiltered fun. Until next time, stay morally gray.
Bye.